Autobots, Decepticons, and everything in between to another episode of Fixing Transformers. And in today's we're going to take a look at the origins of Berserker, Dreadbot, Onslaught, and Mohawk. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So as a brief recap, these Decepticons made their debut in Transformers The Last Knight, where all besides Berserker would be broken out of jail by Megatron and served to be part of his crew. They would help Megatron out up until the town battle, where they were all killed off. So it would be easy to say that these characters were just filler to be killed off, which is kinda sad, and this is further proven with their reused models, with the exception being Mohawk. But what if I told you that these reused models actually served a purpose and gave insight on the backstories of these characters? So for me to prove my point that there was an insight behind these characters, let's take a look at Transformers Dark of the Moon, since Onslaught, Berserker, and Dreadbot's models appear here. Let's start off with Onslaught. We can clearly see that his design was a retool of Longhaul's, and the reason why this makes sense is because Longhaul's body type is also a Decepticon protoform type, proven by the fact that we see one of the Longhaul protoforms scan a waste management truck. And though we can easily speculate that there were multiple Longhaul protoforms, I'd say that the one that became Onslaught is the one that we're looking at right now, and that is because of the relative size of what the protoform is scanning. Let me explain. According to this Transformer scale chart, a Mack waste management truck is 31 feet long. Now if we look at Onslaught's Western Star tow truck alternate form, it's 37 feet long. But here's the kicker. If we look at these two vehicles side by side, we can see that the garbage truck is much bigger, while the tow truck is much longer. Now why is this important, you may ask? Well, the garbage truck's hopper, the part where the trash is stored, is hollow, and it's also very tall, while the tow truck in contrast is more dense. So what I'm trying to say here is, if garbage truck Onslaught wanted to switch out of his temporary vehicle form and into something more sleeker, he'd be able to, since the hollow hopper of the garbage truck will become the densely packed tow truck flatbed along with the boom. So with that explanation in mind, I hope it helps show you how Onslaught has enough mass to become a garbage truck, which is a much taller and hollow vehicle, along with becoming a tow truck, which is shorter and longer, but also a denser vehicle. Now the last thing I want to say is, and this probably is a coincidence, but do you think it's funny that both Onslaught and this protoform are green and white, along with the fact that the garbage truck and the tow truck have 3 wheels that are on the ground, with one being raised? Well, I guess that's just food for thought. Now let's move on to Berserker and Dreadbot, and for them you can easily tell that their designs are retools from Crowbar and Crankcases. Now we know for a fact that they are not Crankcase and Crowbar, since we clearly saw Crowbar get shot in the face with his lifeless corpse smoking on the ground, and Crankcase got his face blown up by his own bomb, so we can put the nail in the coffin that these guys are not the same characters. But to answer the question on why they look so similar is because they are Dread protoforms. Let me explain. The Dread protoform is a body type within the protoform family. They are usually more animalistic, with some of them preferring to walk on all fours, and this can be seen through their movements, along with their overall design. An easy way to tell them apart from the standard Decepticon protoform is by their facial design. The Dread protoforms usually have 4 eyes, while the standard ones only have 2. So with that out of the way, we can conclude that Berserker and Dreadbot came from the Dread protoform family, and most likely came down during the events of Dark of the Moon. But now you may be saying, Trance, did all the protoforms die in a Dark of the Moon battle? Well, my answer to this would be no. And it's because literally hundreds of protoforms came down when Sentinel opened the portal, with some just walking out of the portal while others were stationed on motherships. And the bulk of the Decepticon forces were stationed in Chicago. But if you remember in the film, we heard Sentinel say that there are hundreds of pillars. And the reason why this is important because Sentinel sent out hundreds of Decepticons around the world to spread the pillars around evenly.
The pillars. Where are the pillars?
You saved 5 of them, including the control pillar.
Only 5? We once had hundreds.
They're spreading hundreds of pillars around the globe right now.
So with that in mind, we know that there would be hundreds of protoforms who sent pillars up into the sky. And I think it's reasonable to say that not all of them made their way back to Chicago, since we would have seen an army easily double the size of what we saw in Dark of the Moon. And you could say that the protoforms got sucked back into Cybertron once the control pillar was destroyed. But I'm going to have to say no to this as well, since in Age of Extinction we saw many of the Decepticon ships that crash landed were still on Earth, with average everyday humans getting their hands on them. But to fully push my point on how Decepticon protoforms are all over the world, take a look at this clip.
Word has it Japan, India, the Israelis may have gotten their hands on a couple of ships. Apparently the Russians are starting a bidding war.
As you can see, there are protoforms all the way up in Japan. Now though this doesn't specifically state that Decepticon fighter ships were left there, but I would have to say that they were, since the portal was open in Washington DC. And how would the protoforms get to various continents around the globe without a ship? So with all that info left on the table, I believe it concludes that the protoforms were scattered around the globe, and that Berserker and Dreadbot were highly likely to be participants in transporting the various pillars to different continents, for them to not be involved in the Battle of Chicago, thus not being killed. And this statement holds true for Onslaught too, since he could have been very well one of the many Decepticons helping transport the pillars all around the globe. And to back this statement up, Onslaught at this time is a garbage truck, and he would definitely be able to fit a couple of pillars in his storage compartment. And this idea was actually used by another Transformer in Dark of the Moon, that Decepticon being Loader. They used his vehicle mode to store pillars for transport, so it's not that far-fetched to say that Onslaught could have done the same. But now let's answer the question how Onslaught, Berserker, and Dreadbot got their updated alternate forms. And well, for Dreadbot, it's very easy to explain. I think along the way when he went to a different country, he scanned a Volkswagen Type 2 T1 microbus as a more definitive and personalized alternate form. This would cause him to get rid of his temporary vehicle form, which was most likely a police cruiser. Now, though it's never explained how Dreadbot's vehicle mode got rusty, I like to think that when he was hiding from Cemetery Wind, he went into stasis lock, which is basically a sleep mode for Transformers, like Optimus did in Age of Extinction, and gradually over time became rusty. And this rust theory is not that far-fetched, since in the movie timeline, Dark of the Moon is set in 2012, with Age of Extinction being set 5 years later. So if in those 5 years just sitting somewhere, he could have easily become rusty. Or as an alternate theory similar to Megatron, he scanned a Volkswagen bus while it was rusty, and thus the rust became an attribute of his robot mode. But out of these two theories, it's up to you which one you prefer. Now for Berserker, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, since we never fully saw what vehicle he was. And the concept art doesn't really help us out either, since the only thing that we can see is some sort of off-road tire. Now Berserker's toy adaptations have shown that he is a police Suburban, like the rest of the Dreads. But this is where I have to disagree. Since if Berserker scanned the exact same vehicle that Crankcase scanned, then his color should exactly match what Crankcase looks like. But as we can see, that is not the case. Besides his red tattoos and green energon, his base color looks to be a light gray, with having a darker color in his legs, along with the fact that his dreadlocks are lesser and smaller than Crankcase's. So at the end of the day, I personally believe that Berserker is not a police Suburban, but actually a silver Suburban that is lifted. Hence why we see more of an off-road look in his tires, with the silver parts being an attribute of his vehicle color, and the more darker lower legs being the chassis of the Suburban, explaining why it's darker in color. And the last thing I want to say to you guys about Berserker is, if we would see him transform, where do you think the red parts would go on his vehicle mode? Last but not least, let's move on to how Onslaught got his vehicle mode. And while his vehicle was specifically made for Transformers The Last Night, and the first images of it ever shown was in August of 2016. So for the sake of this, let's say that Onslaught's Western Star 4900 SF tow truck came into manufacturing in 2016. And since Transformers The Last Night takes place no longer than 2022, then we can easily say that Onslaught realistically was able to scan his truck mode before the events of The Last Night. Now my next point I'm going to say is going to be more or less speculation. On one of the Cemetery Wind kill cards, there is a robot named GarageBot, and on the card it shows an image of Longhaul, clearly not Onslaught. But on TF Wiki, GarageBot is classified as a Decepticon that scanned a waste management truck in Dark of the Moon, which in this theory is Onslaught. But here's the real kicker, GarageBot is not listed as deceased. And this would add up since Onslaught would have survived the events of Age of Extinction. But now the question is, why does this image show Longhaul? And why is his name GarageBot? Well, if you think about it, Onslaught and Longhaul's designs are quite similar, so putting Longhaul on the card as a placeholder for what Onslaught would have looked like wouldn't be that far-fetched. Now you may be saying that the Longhaul that we saw in the final battle of Dark of the Moon is supposed to be GarageBot, but the only issue with this is, we clearly saw Longhaul get killed by Optimus. So in theory, if this was supposed to represent Longhaul, then the card should have said deceased. But to fully seal the deal, TF Wiki states that GarageBot's name is a typo, missing a B, and should be spelled GarbageBot, which then goes full circle on how this card is representing the Longhaul protoform that scanned the waste management truck, concluding Onslaught to be the waste management truck from Dark of the Moon. But now let's move over to Transformers The Last Night, and talk about how Mohawk got to Earth. And for him it's more trickier to find out, since he had to be on Earth no later than 2017, since that's where the events of Age of Extinction takes place. And at the end of AoE, we can speculate that's when Megatron formed his crew, from finding surviving Decepticons around the globe. And this is where Mohawk comes into play. As we learned from Transformers The Last Night, Cybertronians keep on coming to Earth, and over the years it's been speeding up. Now, though we do not know when this mass immigration started, we can easily suggest that it started sometime after Age of Extinction, and I believe that Mohawk was one such immigrant who came down from Cybertron to Earth during the mass immigration. And once he landed, he would scan his 2016 Confederate Motorcycles P-51 combat fighter, and eventually be found by Megatron, ultimately joining his crew. And just like that, that's the origins of Berserker, Onslaught, Dreadbot, and Mohawk. But I'm not done yet, since I want to cover some classifications and fun facts about them, starting off with Mohawk. And I did not know about this detail until creating the video, but if you look closely on his right arm, he has many salad forks along with a single spoon, along with having a single spray can duct taped to his chest. Now, though these are cool inclusions, the thing that baffles me the most is that when Mohawk transforms, these objects disappear, and it's very apparent with all this cool green spray painted detail that he's customized himself with, from his tire to his Mohawk. And logically, this detail should show up on the bike, But the thing that gets me the most is, while in robot mode, Mohawk has green rims, and yet in vehicle mode he doesn't. And as you can see with his transformations, the green just appears when going into robot mode and disappears when going into vehicle. Now I think the real reason why this happens is because of the bike that Mohawk is. The 2016 Confederate Motorcycles P-51 Combat Fighter is a special motorcycle. 61 were ever produced, and were hand-built by 2 people. So I personally think that Michael Bay did not want to paint over the bike, since it would destroy its initial value. And usually with the more expensive Transformers cars, they have to be eventually returned, letting Paramount getting some of their money back. For example, the reason why Drift wasn't a Bugatti Veyron anymore was because that car was too expensive to maintain. So that's the reason why they changed him to a Mercedes-Benz AMG GTR, which is a $112,000 car, compared to the Veyron, which is a $2.7 million car. And since Mohawk's bike was most likely going to be returned back to Confederate, they would have to keep the bike in pristine condition, hence why we do not see salad forks and spray cans hanging off the bike. But that still doesn't justify an in-universe reason why they are gone. And I found this image on the internet that would give more of an idea what Mohawk would look like if he had more of a green color to him in his vehicle mode. Another fun fact on Mohawk is, he was supposed to have a scene fighting Drift, but that was sadly scrapped. And the last fun fact on Mohawk that I have is, did you know that Mohawk's grill was actually an unused movie prop? And it still baffles me that they even made it. Now moving along to Onslaught, he has 2 different head designs. One that is a reuse of long hauls, and the other that is used to pronunciate words. Another fun fact is that there was supposed to be a battle in a train yard where Onslaught would have thrown around trains, but sadly, like most things in The Last Night, it was sadly scrapped. An additional fun fact is that Onslaught's Decapitator has 2 modes, one for close combat and one for long range, where this little gun sticks out of it. But by far the coolest fact about Onslaught is, Onslaught has actually been seen used to be an actual tow truck for Western Star. And the best thing is that they kept his color scheme along with the Decepticon insignia. Now it looks like his purpose, according to the article that I read, was that the Onslaught truck is being used to tow Western Star trucks around to different locations for Western Star. But now moving on to Berserker and Dreadbot, the original concept designs looked very different to what we saw in the film. They more or less look like protoforms, with Dreadbot having no Volkswagen bus parts whatsoever. And the weird thing is that there was a character of Hatchet's model who would have joined a duo, but he was sadly scrapped last minute. And if you look at these concept arts, they are kinda weird, in the fact that Berserker has a crossed out Autobot symbol, Dreadbot has a crossed out Decepticon symbol, and of Hatchet also having a crossed out Decepticon symbol. And he also has blue eyes for some reason. And this leads me to believe that maybe they could have been Autobot Dreads, at least for the Red Hatchet and Dreadbot, but with Berserker staying as a Decepticon. Or maybe these Dreads made their own faction called the Anarchist Dreads. But the speculation is up to you guys. Another fun fact that I have on Dreadbot is that they actually placed his back tires to look like what a Volkswagen bus would have had. Now this surprised me since Dreadbot has such a short role in the film, and I thought that they wouldn't even bother changing the tires since you would barely even see him. But they actually did, so definitely massive props to the CGI modeling team. An additional fun fact is that Dreadbot's working name was Hooligan. It was the original working name that Crowbar had in Dark of the Moon. And the last fun fact that I have on Dreadbot is that he has Christmas lights around his arm. And though we do not see them in his vehicle mode, they most likely are inside it, and they somehow wrap around his arm during transformation. Now the last and final discussion on these characters that I want to bring to light are some unanswered questions. Starting off with their promotional bios, and are they canon or not? Starting off with Onslaught's, it reads as follows. Tactician and Battlefield Lieutenant, this Decepticon is recognizable for his green hue, and alternate form as a heavy-duty tow truck. Prone to violence when provoked, rumored to be working on a new weapon called the Decapitator. Now this bio is mainly vague and more or less describes what Onslaught looks like, but I find it interesting that he's a Battlefield Lieutenant, which makes sense since he is the leader of the Combaticons. And though in the Bay continuity we don't know if Bruticus ever existed, this bio hints at that, with him being a tactician. So I'd have to say that this bio is canon since it's mainly vague, but it does give some details on the Onslaught's occupation, which matches up with his G1 counterpart. And for his new weapon, the Decapitator, I presume it's that massive claw weapon that he has, but the only one who got decapitated was him. Now moving on to Mohawk's bio, it states, a knife-wielding noble Decepticon with a taste for mayhem. Alternate mode is a motorcycle. Fiercely loyal to Megatron, Mohawk is a deadly foot soldier. Now like Onslaught's bio, it's mainly vague and it just describes the character. But the one issue on his card that I have is that it stated that he's 14 feet tall. Now if you look at this shot where Mohawk is standing by a guard, there is no way he's that tall. And a fan-made scale chart says that he's 10 feet tall, which seems to be more reasonable. Now moving on to Dreadbot, his bio states, incarcerated for a bank robbery after leaving 9 dead and the money untouched. His massive frame slices through walls and defends himself virtually against all ammunition. Wields a distinctive Cybertronian firearm that obliterates its targets. Now this bio surprisingly makes sense for Dreadbot, since it states that he cannot be taken down by ammunition. So for Grimlock to use his massive teeth to eat him, it makes a lot of sense for his cause of death. And now last but not least, moving on to Berserker. His bio states, possibly the most homicidal of all Transformers, this Decepticon Combaticon was imprisoned after leaving countless bodies in his wake with their flesh sucked dry. Antisocial, impulsive, lacking in empathy and coincidence, in short, a complete sociopath, not to be trusted under any circumstances. Do not transport without proper restrainment procedures. And to top it all off, on his file it says do not let out under any circumstances. And this matches up in the film, since when we saw Megatron get rejected when asking for Berserker to be let out, he didn't seem to be mad, since he kinda knew that it was going to be a tall order, and probably wasn't going to happen. And he chose him over the Combaticon leader Onslaught, so that there definitely shows that Berserker is dangerous. And in his bio it basically states that he is a vampire, with him saying in the film that he'll suck your brains. Which I have no clue how the hell that works, and nor do I want to find out. And if all this, it explains why I had to put a muzzle on him, strap him to a chair, and touch him with a 10.5-foot pole. Now before I end off the video, I want to answer some quick questions on these guys. For example, why were they taken out so easily? Well, the real reason is plot. But for an in-universe answer, even though they were 6-4, they were taken out pretty strategically. Let me explain. Barricade went after Cade and Izzy, causing Grimlock to give them an assist, smacking Barricade into a wall and ending his role in the fight. This causes Megatron and Dreadbot to attack Grimlock, where Grimlock would grab Megs and slam him towards Dreadbot, causing Dreadbot to stumble, giving Grimlock the opportunity to kill him. Now in the meantime, Onslaught was unfairly outnumbered, 1-2, and got killed by Drift and Crosshairs, and more or less why he is shown to be so weak is because he doesn't know how to take on two foes at once. And this is more or less proven if you slow down the clip. You can see Onslaught looking between the two, not knowing what to do, and when he decides to focus on Crosshairs by pointing his gun towards him, he immediately gets struck down by Drift, where he would then turn his attention towards him. But then he gets shot down by Crosshairs, and the sad thing is that you can slowly see Onslaught accept his fate as he brings his head up slowly to look at his attackers for the last time. Then in the next shot we see Nitro fighting off B and Grimlock, and Megatron giving cover fire for Zeus, as Grimlock knocks Nitro down. But as Crosshairs and Drift come back, Megatron orders a retreat, and during all this Mohawk eventually got lost when trying to find Cade, and was shot down by Bumblebee in a parking garage. And in conclusion, Megatron's gang got a bad hand in how the fight played out, with only one of his convicts surviving, which was Nitro Zeus. Now next question is, why was Mohawk able to survive decapitated while Onslaught died? And well, the reason for this is because his spark is in his head, similar to Frenzy. And the reason for this is, since his body is so skinny, his spark cannot fit in it. So the only logical space it could fit in would have to be his head, since it has enough space for it to fit. And then this moves me to my next point. What happened to Mohawk after? And well, we don't know for certain if B finished him off, but if you remember it in Transformers 1, he let Barricade survive after he beat him in battle, so I have to say based upon that, Mohawk lived. But he wouldn't be able to reattach his head to his body, since Bumblebee's first shot decapitates Mohawk, but the second one explodes his body, leaving Mohawk stranded as a head, unless he would be able to grow tiny legs like Frenzy and walk away, but I doubt Mohawk could do that. Now next question is, how did Onslaught's head move onto the car door? And well, the explanation I have is a bit dark. As you can see in this scene, Onslaught's head is on the ground, but when Mohawk climbs onto the car, Onslaught's head is sparking and leaning on the car door. And what makes the situation more sketchy is this audio.
His fat head. Don't get any better than that.
Now this does not sound like an Autobot thing to say, but with those remarks about Onslaught's head, it gives an idea that Crosshairs and Drift may have played around with it, explaining how it ended up against the car door. And for the reason why his mouth is smoking, it honestly looks like a gunshot wound, and since we see Crosshairs have 2 pistols, it's easy to say that he probably shot Onslaught in the mouth. So yeah, don't think about this one too much. Now the last and final question would be, how did they all get captured? And while there's no concrete answer to how this happened, but I personally think after the TRF was created, they picked off Megatron's crew one by one, while each of them were on a mission, possibly exploring the world for signs of Unicron, since if you remember, Megatron was seen at all 5 Horn locations, and Nitro makes a big deal on how Optimus blew his chance to kill Unicron, so I think Megs and the gang split up and looked for clues regarding Unicron, leading for each of them to eventually be captured. And just like that, that's the origins of Onslaught, Mohawk, Dreadbot, and Berserker. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you haven't already, check out the origins of Nitro Zeus to complete the origins of Megatron's crew. But before I go, I want to say a big fat thank you to all my Patreons and channel members for supporting the channel. It means a lot and it keeps the channel running, so definitely a big fat thank you to you guys. And as always, if you enjoyed this theory in the Fixing Transformers collection, please give a like rating because it helped the channel a lot. And as always, it's been Trans Theories, reminding you guys to never stop theorizing.